Rustle them up, please.
He said he was going to dial back in from the hospital. He was going to dial back in. I don't know from somewhere else. So he should have the same. We need to just bring it up again.
We're just checking to see whether Larry is going to join us.
Dial in if he's around.
Okay. Okay, if I could call a wee bit of order, please. We'll let John clean up the food and we'll carry on if that's okay. Tina, I think, might have just dropped out for some food as well. So I would like to make a start again, and we'll just recognise Tina's not here, but I'm sure she's going to be back. Just let you know, Andrew's indicated needs to be. What about 2:45? Yeah. Okay. So that's fine. So could we move then, please, to item 9.3, which is the draft annual report. Perhaps we should say, in fairness, the draft annual report, given where it's at, which is fair enough. But I was very keen, given the compressed timing that we have. I think, Paul, you indicated before 28 October is the intended sign-off date. This is, I think, our last meeting before then, and we might discuss that before actual adoption of the audited accounts on the 28th. So useful to have a initial view. So somewhere between the four of you guys, Catherine, do you want to just talk us through your paper or the key parts of your paper, please, before we carry on? Thank you.
Very good afternoon. I'd just like to introduce Marin Gabrick, for those of you who haven't met Marin. So he leads the preparation of the annual report. So he is particularly the one who answers the difficult questions. And Josh and I will just, at a high level, cover off the report and some of the key results so far. So you have the draft, the early draft of the annual report. It has some sections missing, which I'll talk to a bit as we go through. It's still subject to audit completion, so audit is still in the building. So there may be some further changes and some final internal review as well. But basically the annual report, as you know, provides a review of the year that has been and how we've delivered compared to our plans, and also what else has happened that's led us to the financial position we're in at year end. So we've provided this draft just as an interim update into Finance and Risk Committee, and also to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions and to provide feedback to some of the presentation. So on the 5th of October, there's a workshop which will give you further opportunity to sort of discuss some of the presentation and you know, if you want to make any sort of changes to that, particularly the front part of the report. So the annual report's a very long report, and the first half is, if you like, our more plain English story of what's happened over the year. So we look at our performance benchmarks, we look at what the activities have done, and we pull out those highlights and other events that have affected the year. So we do welcome councillor feedback into that area, because it's really the story that you're part of telling. And the second part is of the report is the financials at the back that are, we meet the requirements of public sector accounting standards. They can be a bit more technical, but we again try to make them as plain English as we can. I'll just give a quick summary of the financials, and they are on, if you've got the document you've got, on page 263, the Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expense. So that format is the same format we bring to you every quarter when we do the financial performance, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise to you. So, and I just thought I'd outline just our key results so far. So the main thing is we have a small general rate surplus of about 390,000, and we discussed that when we did the annual plan, and your request was that we use that surplus to support the expenditure for this financial year, which we have done. In the table on the executive summary, I've provided just some high-level numbers for you. So I've provided the consolidated operating revenue and expenditure, and you've heard from the CCOs this morning, but I was just going to quickly talk about some of our own operating revenue and expenditure as TCC alone, and about the capital and the debt. So in terms of our operating revenue, overall our operating revenue is about 3 million down on budget, and our operating expenditure is about 3 million down on budget, for different reasons. So our expenditure, our revenue, we're about just over 7 million, or just under 8 million down on user fees revenue, and about 4 million of that was due to COVID, and the rest was due to a decision not to harvest in the forestry, harvest forestry in the water catchment. So we were at 1.8 million down in revenue there. Some decisions around Harrington Street and the impact on our parking revenue, and just some over estimates of revenue across a couple of our other cash balance activities. So COVID accounted for just over half of that revenue underperformance. In terms of our expenditure, we were also down 3 million overall. So although we had some higher than budgeted expenditure across the business, we also had less depreciation charge, and that was partly due to some revaluation, things that meant our actual depreciation charge is less, and also because of the lower capital delivery last year, meaning we had less depreciation flowing through. So overall, fairly neutral result in that operating surplus. And then we had an impact. If you look on that, I'm not sure if you're on page 263, sorry, I didn't put the table up. But we have had some other losses that have impacted our overall net surplus. So overall, we had budgeted a surplus of 85 million. And that was including all the asset revenues that we get, like vested assets, development contributions, and capital subsidies. That is less than budgeted. Our surplus now is 3.6 million, and that is because we had some unexpected or unbudgeted results, which included the write-off of Harrington Street expenditure. So in the report I've got that at 24 million, but it's actually 19 million, and the other 5 million was other assets written off. There's a question there. And we, I don't think what the other ones were. Oh yes, we increased the provision for weather-tight claims. So we had some expectation or possibility of weather-tight claims as a contingent liability in the previous year, but as things progressed, we moved an amount of that into the provision. And we also had some the revaluations of swaps, which is we're required to report every year at the end of the year the sort of loss of value, if you like, of our swaps based on the interest rates applying at the time. Because the interest rates are very low at the moment, those swaps mean that we declare a loss in there. It's an accounting entry, it's not a cash loss as such. So overall, that result was less favourable than budgeted. Our capital expenditure was down to 131 million against a budget of just over 200 million. Most of that undelivered capital has been carried forward either into this financial year or into later financial years and will be considered as part of the long-term plan. And our net debt is less than budget, so it's 525 million at year end, as opposed to a budget of 544 million. So in the report I've just brought to your attention a couple of items that are not in the report at present, and one is the financial prudence benchmarks. We haven't updated those. They are benchmarks that every council is required to complete that look at our whether we do a balanced budget, our debt levels, and we'll talk to those graphs and those benchmarks when we present the accounts for adoption. They're not in this draft, but just alerting you that we have not achieved on two of those benchmarks. One is the balanced budget benchmark, which that balanced budget benchmark is achieved if revenue, including capital subsidies, is greater than operating expenditure. And this year, partly because of COVID, or primarily because of COVID, that wasn't achieved. Our capital delivery was much lower, so we are behind in our receipt of those capital subsidies, and our revenue was down. So that affected achievement of that benchmark. And the second one, the operations control benchmark, is a cash flow benchmark compared to the LTP budget. So we're considerably behind in that one because our LTP had included much more significant rates rises over the 3 years. So those ones will not be achieved. And I've outlined in paragraph 22 some key themes that we will incorporate in the annual report around the events for the year. So we've divided those into events that are just specific to the year, and they include matters such as COVID-19 and Harrington Street, and ongoing and funding and financing issues that sit around challenges to deliver our capital program and growth impacts. So propose to circulate to council as a draft of that by early next week, so that you'll have had time to look at it before we have our workshop on the 5th of October, just to look at how we're presenting material for the annual report and any questions that have come out of your review of that you don't get to today. So pass over to Josh.
Thank you. My team looks after the non-financial performance measures. So from the 2018 LTP, there are 148 that we measure each year. This year, 135 of them were measured. The result was that 86 were achieved, so that's 58%, which is down from last year, which was around 66%. Of those 49 that were not achieved, 22 of those measures were due to the effects of COVID, so the 27 are not achieved and not affected by COVID. But of those, 14 were within 1 to 10% of the target. Those activities that were affected by COVID are highlighted throughout Chapter 5, which is the activity section, and they were airport, arts and heritage, Bay Court, beachside, city events, community development, elder housing, emergency management, libraries, parks and rec, regulation monitoring, resource recovery and waste, and transport. So a lot of those are number indicators. So with being in lockdown, people weren't able to go places, and then also is a possibility that say, I think for elder housing, they weren't able to go to that.
Thanks for that, you guys. Appreciate that. So we have two papers in effect. We've got the covering one, and it's clear explanation. I must confess, paragraph 22, as you reminded us of, does raise interesting themes that actually will go into the next paper on the LTP, and also are critical. And also we have the draft financial statements themselves. So what I'd like to do is treat this in two ways. Let's consider Catherine and Josh's paper first and the key themes that it does. Then I would like us to spend a few moments just looking actually at the draft annual report itself, if we could do it that way. So Jaco, you'd like to start off the batting, please.
Yeah, on that paragraph, I think it was 21 on financial prudence, those benchmarks we missed, what's the implications of missing those?
It's just a reporting that's the situation. Obviously, they do indicate kind of financial risks or a less favourable financial situation. So it's something that we will. It's very similar, as Bruce said. to the issues we're raising with you through the LTP anyway, just to be cognizant of how much revenue are we generating compared to how much we're spending and how much our debt is growing.
If I can just add, like, there will be a lot of councils that breach these benchmarks this year, particularly those with exposure to cash through CCOs and the like, so we certainly won't be alone in that.
Go for it. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kelvin.
Yeah, just wondering, this is probably more to maybe Marty, what the implications are of under-delivering or not delivering 30% of the capital that we'd budgeted for, like what that means for the city.
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, there are a number of different, I think, outcomes as a result of that. Obviously, the infrastructure we had said we would deliver won't be delivered, and so there's a delay to that, and potentially an impact on the quality and timeliness of service. There's also an impact, a financial impact on the fact that we have rated for this. And I know we have a factor of adjusting the rates to compensate for the fact that we won't deliver 100%, but certainly not 30%, Paul, is it?
So we allowed 70 million of under-delivery when we set the rate number for last year. So that it still is a lower number than that, with that COVID interruption, basically. Just, you know, there wasn't a lot of delivery through that period.
And of course, it just creates a bow wave of capital works that we need to do. I know it's no consolation. However, we're in a very similar situation to most, if not all, other local authorities and central government agencies, for that matter. So.
Yeah, my tuppence worth, Yoko, is that your budget is to drive the progress of the city, and if you haven't achieved it, it is, as Marty said, a challenge. And that's something which I agree, Marty. I think all my committees have been trying to focus on, but it is underachievement. Kelvin, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Just relating to paragraph 19C, in terms of the fixed interest rates, etc. You say there the losses are not realised, but we've still recorded them. Can you clarify if, or do we ever actually realise those losses? Do we treat them as, we don't really treat them as losses, do we? I'm just wondering why we record it if we're not ever realising them.
It's accounting standards require recognising it. If you did nothing for it as they mature, they'll write back to zero, so gains will come through to offset, go back to zero. In an accounting sense, it's an accounting valuation as compared to 31st of March, 30th of June, so they move around every day. So those numbers would be, you know, if you did it right now, rates have gone down further, so it'll be even higher. So it's purely a accounting reval.
And that's a requirement?
Yes, under the standards.
Correct me, Martin, if I'm wrong, but it represents an opportunity cost. I mean, what it reflects is we fixed at a certain time and the rates moved against us. This is the cold and comfort message of Marty. If you look around the P&Ls of a good number of local authorities, there's some quite significant losses booked. But as Martin said, it's an accounting fair valuation issue at the moment, which won't crystallise.
Well, that's the nature of hedging, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. A position you take, and you'll always be bound to be wrong. Okay, any other questions for on the paper at this stage? Are we comfortable? We know where we are. We know what the challenges are, and I suspect that makes us more uncomfortable because that's really needs to be picked up inside the LTP. Could we just turn our attention, please, to the draft annual report itself? And apologies, Catherine, if I offended you by saying it's a draft. It was only because I recognised, I asked for the draft position, but I recognised there are aspects of this which are still to be completed. But I do generally love the layout. Well done. It's superb. I love the the importance of your reporting on performance, Josh, where you've got the challenges and what have you after each of the individual sections. There's some good accountability here. So look, what I'd like to do is suggest, and I just want to open it up for broad discussion on the front. Actually, I would get 17, it might be about 26 pages of the annual report. I have a view that if somebody looks at a set of annual reports, they read the start and they look at the P&L, okay? But the start tends to be the most important part. So that's the mayoral opening and then the information that comes after that. And I'd just like to suggest that actually the question I ask councillors at this stage is, does that look like the year you have had? Does that look like the year that you have had at Tauranga City Council? I'm open for questions. Or comments, actually. Probably it's more likely to be comments. Is this the year that you folk have had, that you are being accountable for to your community? Yeah, go, Cohen. I'm
guess-
looking for them to put their hand up.
I guess the difficulty is that the effects of COVID really only picked up, the last sort of 3 months of our financial year. So it's easy to get to have focus, rightfully so, on COVID. But this goes from the 1st of July 2019. So, a lot of our business as usual happened, like for 9 months. And so I think we just need to put that in perspective. Thanks.
I think that is there at the start. You look at TMV's opening. It reflects the impact of COVID. But I do take your point. That is a key part. This is what it is. Does it show the key achievements, the key output, and the key challenges that you have going forward? I suspect John, go for it.
I mean, I don't know. We've got a workshop coming on the 5th of October, and I think that's an important place to have these discussions. It's always interesting. I mean, if one looks, an obvious thing that jumps out is in the mayoral introduction on page 11. We're a relatively new council. While it's taken time to develop the ability to work together in a positive and collaborative manner, in the headlines at the moment, we have the review and observer team coming in. I mean, I think we've got to be really careful, and this is a theme that I've had ever since I've been on council. And I remember a councillor once saying to me, this is our opportunity to tell our good news stories. And I've said, my response was, no, it's an opportunity to tell the truth, good and bad. So I think there's a conversation to be had around the balance in some of the narratives here, but that's a decision that needs to be collective. And I don't know whether this is the ideal environment. I mean, I assume the workshop or whatever we're having will be public, hopefully. But I think there needs to be some discussion here. It doesn't reflect totally the year, and I pick up Councillor Clout's observation that that I think there's a bit too much on COVID here, and there are other issues which are quite significant through the year that, and not just that year, that we haven't addressed. The capital delivery issue is significant and getting tougher, and it's not just a COVID issue. There's a funding issue, there's an industry capacity issue. There's a lot of stuff here, I think, that needs to be contextualised. But I think the workshop on the 5th would be a good place for getting that stuff on the table. It'll also give us time to reflect. This is a, over 300 pages on top of a 400-page agenda, which we had sort of 3 working days to work around. And in that period of time, some of us were doing reviews, interviews with the Review and Observer team. We had other meetings, that were to prepare for, workshops on the TSP. This needs time for reflection. So I think the timing of the workshop is good, and I appreciate the opportunity to contribute at that point. Sorry, you asked a question, so that was a response. Thank you.
No problems at all. I take that point and I'll treat it as good advice. before we do move on, is there any other comment people would like to make at this point? Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think again it's a workshop question or a workshop discussion, but I think there needs to be a bit more emphasis on the future challenges and our future financial difficulties rather than, but I suppose it is just looking back over the last year, but looking forward there are some significant.
Yes, a good annual report will always give you the prospect for at least the next year. So I agree with you, Yako. That's something I would be looking for as a reasonably concise statement. There are some interesting points here on challenges, which is good and transparent. Whether again that's the way you would choose to do it, that's another story. John?
Through you to get back into the format of the meeting, which is a questions. So through you, perhaps to Catherine, if someone has something they would like to see, if you like, on the agenda of the workshop, what's the process for feeding a question or a suggestion in before, so staff have an opportunity to respond or be prepared or anticipate? What's the process? Who do we flick an email to? Or
Good question.
Yeah, look, I think we need to provide councillors an opportunity to provide feedback on narrative typos and small issues, as opposed to them sort of coming in ad hoc. And secondly, if there are specific issues that you wish to have some more meaningful discussion or debate or explore, likewise, I think they need to be raised. And so, Josh, would you be the conduit, the point of contact? And so perhaps if you can, through council catch-up, we'll send something out which creates a framework that you can feed that information back into.
Right, well that seems to be like a good approach. Thank you, John, for your advice about the 5th of October, which to be honest I wasn't aware of. So that's sweet. So critical point here is that this is about our accountability, and I would want to endorse, was it you, John, that said this is about transparency and truth is actually the important thing here. I'm not suggesting this is untruthful, by the way, but I'm saying it's our chance to reflect what did we govern, what did we observe, and is that reflected appropriately here? Wayne?
Yes, Mr. Chair, fear of repeating oneself, but he said look at the front end and reflecting and having a look at Mayor Temby's blurb. As it's interesting to see his final summary and wind-up paragraph, again, working collaboratively with the community is in keeping with helping Tauranga recover and grow. And again, that's just a real common theme that, I mean, we had some pretty powerful groups in the room this morning. I suppose, again, from sort of a relatively outsider looking in, you're sort of perplexed that this isn't ongoing and strong. And look, at the end of the day, I'm a pretty simple bloke. If this was the corporate world, I'd put a simple measure on it, in the sense that I'd love to hear throughout the next year or two that that's measurable, in the sense that if I ask a simple question, what have you done to forge those closer relationships, it would be evident. Everyone can say, yeah, we've formed this group, we're doing this, we're collaborating. So I think it'd be pretty simple to measure here and after. It's been mentioned several times. It'd be interesting to see a year from now just how, is something practical being done to do exactly that. So I'll certainly be trying to keep an eye on that.
John?
And I get the feeling we got into reasonably relaxed on standing orders. But if I can
Always relax, John.
If I can respond to that, I think one of my concerns always around the collaborative urgings of many people is getting together isn't what we're here for, it's actually delivering outcomes. And if I can go to smart growth, for a long period of time, we patted ourselves on the back about leading the country and we were looked to as the model and all the rest of it. And it wasn't until, I believe, the group, in a rare moment of self-reflection, encouraged one of our staff members who's extraordinarily talented to hold up a mirror to us quite honestly, and they came back and said, actually, you've been talking to each other about how wonderful you're working together, but the truth is there is no plan. So although we'd been collaborating, we hadn't delivered the critical outcome, and from that came UFTI. And that honesty is critical, because without that foundation, you don't get the change. So while I appreciate that we need to look at, are we collaborating, we need to make sure that that isn't all we're doing. We're collaborating for a purpose. That purpose is delivered. Those outcomes are measurable, and they're the ones our community wants.
Right, I feel that actually people are not, which is appropriate, have recognised that we've got a workshop on the 5th of October. Paul, I'm correct? 5th of October. Josh, I think you've been designated the herding the cat job of suggesting how you'd like comments and then being able to pull them together so that they can be considered by management as we go into that workshop to finalise the draft. I think that's how you want it, Paul, and that seems to make a lot of good sense. So I appreciate that. So that then leaves us with the formal task of actually receiving Catherine and team's good paper, which is indicating why we are where we are. Do I have somebody that's prepared to move that? Thank you, John. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Andrew. All those in, is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Groovy. A lot of pages for what might seem for us today, Catherine, what seems like a reasonably short part of the agenda, but thank you. It's been a useful insight, and I think we can look forward to some interesting and helpful comments from our council colleagues here in terms of that annual report. So thank you for your effort and your work that you guys are doing. Can we move to item 9.4, which is the funding and finance for the long-term plan? I don't suspect you're moving anywhere fast, Catherine, if I've got this one right. And also Paul and Moen, are you going to come to the front as well? I think it's, I've got your three names down here. So between you, I'll let you guys start the show again, please.
Same process, I'll do the easy bits. These guys can do the hard bits. So this paper is really the first financial introduction into the LTP. It's really broken down into three areas. The first is looking at, and it's, you know, there's no new story in this, but it's really outlining some of the financial issues that we have both from a funding and financing perspective working into the LTP, noting that we are in the process across the organisation of developing that LTP at the moment. So these are very much forecast numbers, but they're based on what we know at this point in time. And traditionally, it will indicate that there will be a fairly large gap in our numbers. We had a paper to the previous policy committee which spoke about scenarios 1 and 2. Scenario 1 being what we called committed and prioritised, and then scenario 2 being connected and growing communities. So those two scenarios are being formed up as we speak, and will produce obviously the financial parameters that sit around both of those scenarios. But fair to say that we think that even scenario 1 will be quite challenging in terms of fitting our funding and financing that we've got now. So the next part of the report really outlines some of the key levers that we have to pull as we move through the LTP process, and staff have gone through and outlined what we consider are the ones that are potentially have the most significant impact in the timeframes that we've got to be able to actually work through to actually develop the long-term plan. And the purpose of this paper was to get agreements from this committee that they were on the right track, and if there are any other items to be included within there, or vice versa, if there's anything on this list that we don't want to take forward. Obviously there's an enormous pressure to get the LTP done, so anything that can come off the list now is useful, but we really want to focus on trying to bring back to council the right levels of information in that regard, and then finally just how this all fits together into a financial strategy, and the revenue and financing policy, and how that will work through the long-term plan process. So as way of introduction, if I just pass, if there's anything that Catherine and Mohan wish to add, or take questions.
Okay, so just in terms of kind of relationships, if you like, what Mohan's modelled from paragraph 13 and those is really the relationship between the kind of rates levels that we're seeing and revenue levels we're seeing with our capacity to deliver infrastructure, if you like, and the debt to revenue limits we have. So those are the key kind of challenges financially in terms of this long-term plan, and just the information that we've had, that we've brought to you, well, for a number of years now, we've brought to council, that we know there's a bow wave of infrastructure requirements. So we know there's that financial challenge to be able to deliver infrastructure, and on our own, without some other instruments in play, we will struggle to get to the levels of infrastructure delivery that are sought. And so through things like the targeted rate options that are suggested, we're looking for the areas where there are large areas of spend where a bit of investigation might be worthwhile, rather than, and that's why we're sort of saying let's limit what we look at to things which may have a significant impact, and raising items like infrastructure funding and financing tools that government's put in place are likely to be things that we're going to want to look at in this long-term plan period.
Oh, and just for my benefit, can I just ask a dumb question? Can you just explain the difference between what the two graphs are achieving? I'm sorry if it seems to be a simplistic question, but I was struggling to find much in the way of the difference, what it was.
Seem to be hogging all the questions. What does it look like if you assume a 220 capex instead of 200, given that that's this year's budget?
At that level, though, by the time you've got through that 5 years, you've really hit capacity, and so then you start to further restrict your ability to deliver capex.
So,
Thank you, Mohan and Catherine. Do you know the quantum of our likely application to the IFF? Like, have we established which particular green field growth areas we're going to be applying for and the various projects, or is this yet to be done?
I think the most likely ones will be Te Tumu and Tauriko West, and our sort of initial analysis done at $1,000 is about 60 odd million you can get off balance sheet at $2,000 per lot, 120 in that sort of order. Again, that's not in the next year or two, further out in the 10-year plan as those two growth areas come on stream.
Yes. And that's about 25% of the total infrastructure costs of those areas. So it's the IFF on its own can't be the funding for that whole growth area.
Are there further questions? Yes, go Steve.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, just to follow up to Calvin's question, Councillor Clout's question. So, assuming Te Tumu and Tauriko West are underway and thriving and we're putting in lots of infrastructure on the ground by 25, would that be an impact on the green bar up, or is that already been counted?
Putting against projects the same as the total capacity you have. If we have, including those higher, that means something else has to go reduced to keep it in the 200. And that, in this example, I think the last 10-year plan had it in the midway through. Tauriko and Te Tumu both going.
So the aim is to have that, obviously, the budget for you by December. We're aiming to have by mid-October a kind of wish list of capital program and start to deal with that prioritisation and get that information out to you. So it sounds a little bit like we're talking in code, but we know that there's a big demand and we know there needs to be a prioritisation process, but we haven't got to that point of saying, right, this would come in then and this would be the total. That piece of work will happen during October and we'll bring information to you then.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the purpose of this was really just really focusing on the levers that we've got, and that there weren't any additional levers or ones that you want to talk. So, say for example, the commercial differential. If you said that we don't want to move it from 1.2 ever again, we won't do any further work on that. I'll take that as an answer. But conversely, if there was another targeted rate, for example, we would. Otherwise, we'll focus our attention on the things that are in this paper.
Can I just check, Paul? The targeted rate, can you explain to me paragraph, gee whiz, there's one here that says you won't pursue it. Yeah, paragraph 19A1, 2. Given the pressures of time, this is transportation and stormwater, it's recommended not to look any further at the target rate opportunities for this LTP. Just clarify that for me, if you could, please.
That's right. So we were looking at two areas where we could have a look at potential targeted rates, and we know that we've got high levels of spend needed in the transport area, and the same with stormwater that may be able to be targeted. So we would focus our energy on looking at whether a targeted rate option existed around those two activities, but we wouldn't at this point look at further targeted rates in other areas.
Right, sorry, I was misreading. I was thinking you were suddenly dispensing with that. Okay, when you were suggesting a staff recommendation that we included as one of the levers. Okay, sorry, my misread. Thank you.
Yeah, just through the chair to Marty, we were hoping to have the advisory board for the sustainability framework so that it would inform some of our decision making for the LTP. What's the timeline for that, and what are the possibilities within that time frame for them to have an effective sort of representation for us at this time?
Look, I don't know. I mean, I think that report came to council 2 weeks ago, where we were given the green light to go out and engage and/or appoint or identify suitable participants in this group. So I'll have to come back and report back to you on timing and how that will or won't or can fit in with the LTP process. But I think Jeremy, when he presented on this last time, alluded to the fact that there was already a whole lot of rich information that we'd picked up through the various consultation processes we'd been through, and it would be my hope that we could have at least the core of that group together that could help advise and guide us through that LTP process. But I'll have to come back. I'll have to get CJ to prepare a report and come back to council on that. So.
Okay, that's useful. Any other questions? Yes, John?
Just to follow up to Councillor Hughes, through you, probably the Chief Executive, what's the timing on that follow-up report? Is that weeks rather than months, one assumes? I'm just checking to see when it's going to land.
I'll have to talk to Christine on where they're at in terms of trying to identify people. But I would rather us report something back formally to a committee as opposed to any other
Sure.
Channel of communication. That way I think everybody can be part of this journey and understand the work that's going on to try and get some benefit out of the appointment of a group to support us in a wholesome way through the LTP process.
Thank you.
Right, and I just wonder, as we sort of perhaps draw this to conclusion, Catherine, just a sense, and I didn't ask for it, so I can't actually ask for detail, but you talked about CapEx by mid-October. Just give us a quick nutshell of sort of what is the schema from here with the LTP?
Right, so we've opened our corporate planning system now. So for about 3 weeks, people in the business will be loading their projects, their costs, their budgets in. Prior to that, there has been some preparatory work within the organisation to ensure that these budgets have taken account of risk and contingency and whatever engagement costs and things, just so that we get better budgeting. So that piece of work has been done, and people will be working on getting their projects in, putting proposals up through the various GMs for sign-off, and then we will start to pull the reports out and start to slice and dice after that time.
Great. Slightly unofficial that I've raised it, Catherine, but I'm going to carry on. Are you comfortable with resource and this is all achievable?
Yes, it will be. I know Christine has said in the past we're about 3 months behind in the long-term plan, and I think Jeremy's presented that idea that this is kind of the brighter long-term plan will be the next one when there's been a lot more community engagement, but we will be doing our best with what we've got to meet the timeframes that we have to do.
So there's an important part to the paper which wasn't missed on me, Paul. If I've called it correctly, you're asking for direction, which is starting to narrow down the scope of what you do. This is my long way of coming back to the recommendations, which is critical. That this is reinforcing a choice I presume made previously around two options: the sort of the committed and essential versus the other. Number one. Number two, in passing this motion in particular, we are directing you only in these areas. We're directing you to look at these areas of funding levers only. We haven't added anything on. Most importantly, we are saying look at these. These are the ones that to us at this stage seem most useful. Have I got it right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think, to add on, the pressure and tension that exists around the LTP. We're 3 months behind because of COVID. There's been 2 annual plans produced in that time, and we're trying to do 2 LTPs to actually trying to come up with the best outcome for the city. So the organisation, this is the 5th LTP I've done. It's by far the most stretched that it's been to actually do that.
Don't forget the city vision we're trying to develop as well.
Okay, so there we go. So I just wanted to get that, thank you for entertaining me with those questions, but it was trying to come back to the point that we've got a motion here and that it does have some direct implications in terms of what we, as the committee, are recommending be the line going forward. So look, I'd like to see, is somebody prepared to move this motion? You are, John? Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Andrew. Is there any discussion? John?
Well, I'll pick up the comments made by the chair, and there are ongoing conversations, and one of the conversations is, you know, making sure that we, I don't know, sort of the demands and expectations we place on this process are in fact reasonable, fulfill our requirements, you know, the requirements of the Local Government Act, but at the same time we don't misdirect valuable staff resource to explore things where really there's a marginal return. So this reflects a level of discipline by the governance team, developed in association with the executive leadership team, which means that we get the best bang for buck out of this process while fulfilling our you know, obligations to our community and requirements under the Act. I think, you know, the thought that I've seen go into this and the supporting documents and discussions, I think I'm quite comfortable that this is good. And of course, we always have that power of general competence. If we need to, we can always change our mind. If the chief executive comes to us and says, I need more or less of this, then we will listen, I'm sure.
Andrew, anything you'd like to add to those comments from John? Right. Thank you for that. So we do have the motion. I won't read it all out. It's there in front of you, but indicating that we agree to further consideration of those listed, okay, was 7, funding and finance matters as a part of the prioritisation process for Paul and team to actually rock through with the LTP. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you for that, you guys. Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot about that. Christine is with us somehow and may give us an update.
Christine, are you able to update on the Independent Sustainability Advisory Board and just the process where we're at?
Apologies for not being there today. So we are just working through identification of the skill sets that would be appropriate to have on the Sustainability Project Advisory Board and trying to identify a range of potential people. So that process is underway at the moment. And what we can do is we can report back to that one, to the council once that's further progressed. In terms of impact on the LTP, I think Jeremy spoke about this a little while ago. There will be some opportunity, but I think it will be difficult for it to be comprehensive just because of the amount of information we're going to have to pass on to this group so that they have a good understanding of the overall business of council and be able to pass comment. So we're going to have to work out a way for them to be able to add best value. And I think there's 2 opportunities for input into the LTP. One is into comment or view on the prioritisation, but I think the more likely influence is the LTP is a budget allocation and resource allocation process, and once resources have been allocated to projects, then the expenditure of that money and how that is utilised and the extent of sustainability investment as part of that, I think subsequent to the adoption of the LTP, when we're moving into actually spending that money, there'll be another opportunity at that point as well. So I don't see that the process is complete once the LTP is adopted. So we just need to work through how we can involve them in the best way in the relatively short period of time that will exist in the LTP development process.
Yeah, Heidi, probably right to follow-up question.
Thanks, Christine. Just in terms of timeline again, what's your thinking around when we'll have those that set up and in place?
I have to, sorry, I haven't connected with the team on this for the last week, so I know that they were working away on it. And I'll touch base and we'll do an update to elected members informally and then subsequently formally through an executive report or whatever the first formal opportunity is to just give you an update on that timing. But I do know that it is underway.
Yes, Heidi?
Thanks, Christine. Just one more question. Are we able to have more of a workshop style session with councillors at some time with this? We haven't really kind of sat down and really got together on it, and I'm just wondering if that might be possible.
It would be good if you be clear. I'm just trying to understand. And when you're saying this, I suppose, are you talking about once we've got the board in place to have a meet and greet and talk to them about your expectations and thinking? Is that what you're talking about?
Through the chair, if I can just ask if there's any comments from the other councillors as to what, how they're feeling in terms of what they would like after the board or before the board, or are we feeling really comfortable at this stage, or if that's...
I think there are two phases here. One is to get the board in place. The second is to work with council on what a framework might be that we adopt to, if you like, filter our business and drive our business through. So I think that was the conversation we had at the last meeting. I think we will come back and have a conversation with council on the composition of the board before essentially any commitments are made, just to sense check that. And then I think we need to move, and we're already, I think, behind the scenes. Do you want to push it? Yeah, we're already working behind the scenes on what might be a range of or options of various models, and I know that you've been involved in some of those discussions about a range of different models that are currently available. So, but ultimately, we want council, from a organisation perspective and from an elected member perspective, to own whatever we unfold, whatever we fold out through this process. So,
Just pick up on that. So the direction that you approved at the policy committee, where you approved proceeding with the board, was for a framework to be recommended effectively, and I would envisage that the board would we'd be doing some work on that. Then that would go to the board for their having to have a think about that, and then there'd probably be the standard process which we would use, which we would workshop that with elected members. And I would presume that would be joint with elected members and members of the board and staff, and then we would come to a formal meeting, because the decision-making authority for adoption of a framework sits with council. So it's a recommendation from the board, but the actual decision-making authority sits with council, or in this case it'll actually be the policy committee for that decision to be made. So there would be that normal workshopping process as part of that.
Thanks, sounds good to me. I just wanted to check in with councillors. We don't have informals or anything, so it's really hard to kind of get a steer as to how everybody else is thinking. So if everybody else is, that sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Christine, and thank you, Heidi, for your question. That's been very good. I wonder if we can move on then, please, to item... I think we've done 9.4. I was about to redo it. We could do it the second round of it, couldn't we? 9.5, please, which is around Lagoima requests and requests from Mayor and councillors. Is Coral going to run this? I'm looking for Coral. Is she around?
It's me. Yeah. Bruce, I'll speak to this.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
It's quite all right. I don't get the chance often, so I'll take it. Good afternoon. So you're seeing a snapshot of the Quarter 4 Local Government Official Information Act requests and Mayor and Councillor queries. Really the only feature of the quarter is that local government information requests increased by about 100%. During this period, however, we were in alert level 4 and 3, so make of that what you will. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, questions for Susan. Got anything you want to add, guys? There are none? Sorry, you've moved the motion, have you, Yako? And Andrew, you've seconded that we receive the report. Okay. Are there any final questions? We're right? Yeah, John, sorry.
There was a note about the number of Lagoima requests in the fourth quarter, but I note it's significantly less than the number, it's only just more than the number of Lagoima requests in the second quarter, and it's actually significantly less in the number of Lagoima requests in the first quarter. The unusual quarter would appear to be the third quarter. And is that basically because that's January, February, when people are got better things to do than think about council? Is that actually a seasonal thing? Is that a pattern we've seen before? The observation was made about quarter four, which made quarter four sound exceptional, but quarter four seems to be normalish. Quarter three seems to be unusual, and is that seasonal?
I couldn't comment on whether there was a trend, but Coral may be able to.
The second quarter was when the election was held, so it was from September, October to December. So it may just be that there was, election time going on and new councillors coming in, etc. So I don't know. No, that would be the second quarter because it's Oh, sorry. I don't know really.
John, I mean, it's interesting that you're trying to look for trends or understanding, and I think that is not a bad thing. And I mean, I guess when you look at this for the year at 658 requests, it always begs the question that actually we are a receiver of these rather than necessarily the initiator. But it does also make you wonder, and I don't mean this as Susan, as a critique, by the way, of Tauranga, but are we doing all we can? Because Lagoimas are about information becoming public and making information public on a proactive basis. I leave it as a rhetorical question, but that's the logical thing that I think would come out of this one when you look at that. But I would love to also know whether it is year on year with other years.
We'd love to answer that rhetorical question.
Yes, we would. We have recently started publishing Lagoimas of interest on our website, which is a change for us. We used to receive reports to see how we stacked up against other councils. I haven't seen one since pre-COVID. I recall we were quite middle of the road in terms of our numbers, but that may have changed.
Yeah, we are expecting the Ombudsman, his report at some stage in coming weeks, that'll provide, I think, public commentary on the same issues.
Yeah, no, look, appreciate that, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes, but I don't think it's a question on we should lose, and I hear your point that when the Ombudsman report comes in, that may beg the question further about the proactivity that we have or we could have in terms of it. Right, Jaco has moved that we receive the report, and I think Andrew has seconded it. I'd like to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you for that. We have no late items other than the one that we're going to pick up under public excluded. So look, I would like to move under item 11 that we move into public excluded session. I won't read out all the reasons why, other than for you to note those. So if I move that, do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Dawn. All those, is there any discussion? I shouldn't see that, given we just talked about Lagoima. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. We can move into public excluded and let us know